I've watched just about every video on YouTube about making model roads, and in this video I'll be combining the best techniques I have found to repaint this road. I'll show you how I take it from this to this. And I'll walk you through how I made and painted this small parking lot. The road base was made in a previous video, but I'll be using the same techniques for making the parking lot using plaster of Paris. But if you want a more in-depth demonstration of how I casted the road, you can always check that earlier video. I started by planning the car parking area for the station platform. I wanted to make it quite small with about 5 or 6 parking spots. I also considered adding a bus stop, but after some research, I realized most bus stops in areas like this in South Africa are usually just a small roadside shelter with no pull-off bays. The bus just stops in the road without pulling off to the side. So I decided to not worry about the bus stop at the moment, and I'll save it for a future video. I also remembered I want to add streetlights later, so I made sure the spacing would still work after adding the parking lot and bus shelter, with no obstructing things underneath the layout. First I sanded the road with 80 grit sandpaper to smooth the surface for painting. I also cleaned the edges since I'll be adding curbstones. After sanding, I vacuumed up the dust. Then I glued down the station platform using hot glue, because the parking lot will connect to it, but I don't use an excessive amount of glue, so it would be easy to remove without damaging it if I ever need to do so. After marking where the parking lot would go, I glued down 2x2mm strip wood around the edges to keep the plaster from spreading all over the place. I didn't have enough strip wood, so I used an ice cream stick. It's also 2mm thick and it worked just fine. Use just enough hot glue to hold it in place, because you'll need to remove the strip wood later when the plaster has cured. For mixing the plaster of Paris without getting too many bubbles in it, I say not too many bubbles because it's basically impossible not to get any bubbles in it. I saw a Kathy Mallet video in which she showed you don't actually mix the plaster after adding water. So here's what you do. First you add the water to a cup and then start adding the plaster small amounts at a time. And just let the water absorb into the plaster without touching it. It only takes about 20 seconds at most for the water to absorb into the plaster. Mix it to a fairly thin consistency, so it levels itself. I used an ice cream stick to push it into the corners and smoothed it out using the steel ruler. This ruler I'm using is very old and it's quite thick and not very flexible, so it's perfect for doing this. Tapping the layout also helps to release any bubbles and to smooth it out. After about 10 minutes the plaster started curing and I scraped off the excess plaster. An hour later I removed the strip wood and cleaned up the glue left behind. Before sanding the plaster it has to be completely dry, which can take quite a while. So to help speed up the drying process I put the layout outside in the sun for a full day. To make sure it's completely dry, it should not feel cold to the touch anymore. If it's not completely dry, it will clog up the sanding paper. Then I started sanding it using 80 grit sandpaper. The plaster is more durable than you might think, and 80 grit sandpaper didn't do much to it. Anyway, I don't want to sand it perfectly smooth. I wasn't aiming for the surface to be perfect, since I don't want to make the parking lot look new, and I will paint a few pothole patches on it. I mean, I'm gonna make it look old. Then I decided I want to make a parking island with a small tree in this corner. Parking islands with a small tree provide shade for parked cars, and in my opinion it just looks better with a bit of greenery. I made some simple curbstones in Blender and 3D printed them. I used some 600 GSM cardstock and I cut out a raised area for the parking island. I then used white glue to glue it in and the curbstones around it. After finishing the road, I will finish the ground texture and make a tree for it. I also add curbstones around the parking lot and on the sides of the road. There are a few methods to add scratches on a road. One method is using a fine tip pen to draw them on, and the other method, which I will be using, is making physical scratches on the surface before painting. I use my hobby knife to do this. I recommend using Google Street View for a quick and easy method to get references to see how cracks and scratches usually occur on roads. I also make some potholes and larger damage on the road. Adding scratches to the parking lot was a bit harder, because I didn't really know where scratches would occur, so I just added some in random spots. For painting, I keep it super simple and just use cheap acrylic paint. I mix white, brown and black. After mixing, it was a bit too light, so I added a bit more black. Also keep in mind the color will change a bit after drying. For me, it got a bit darker once dry. The plaster of Paris will absorb a lot of the moisture in the paint, so you might need to dilute the paint with a bit of water. But also, because the paint gets absorbed by the plaster, it's not super important to use high quality expensive paint, because it's not like painting plastic or steel where the paint would be a thin layer on top of the surface. I hope that makes sense. I apply the paint using a paintbrush and then follow it up with a sponge using a stippling motion to remove the brush marks. For adding the fine asphalt texture on the road, I had a few ideas. I thought about sprinkling on the fine dirt texture while the paint was still wet, but the plaster absorbs the moisture in the paint so fast that there's simply no time to apply it before the paint dries. Another idea I had was to use a sponge with very little paint on it and stippling it on. However, getting an even coverage seemed very difficult. So I decided to try a method I saw in a Luke Towan video a few years ago. And that's to use spray paint, but spraying it on from far away so the paint partially dries in the air, creating a speckled effect. So, after masking the rest of the scenery, I started spraying it while holding the spray can about 60 cm away. It's a fine balance you have to find, because if you hold it too far away, it won't stick to the road because it will dry before landing on the road. And if you hold it too close, it will simply paint the road without achieving the desired effect. I didn't have any other paint, so I used Tamiya Fine Grey Primer. I decided to do this inside because it was too windy outside, but I made sure to leave the room until all the fumes had cleared and I opened all the windows. Once done, I removed the masking and glued in the rest of the curbstones from the second batch of prints. One thing I want to mention is, after applying the spray paint speckling effect, you have to wipe down the road using a wet cloth or something, because there will be some fine grey dust from the paint that dried before landing on the surface. I didn't do this, and when I added the road markings it was a problem. So just wipe down the road surface after this step. And if you have another method to add this texture, please let me know in the comments. In this area where I want to add the bus shelter in the future and make a driveway for the house, I glue in flat curbstones. If I have time, I might make the files for the curbstones available on my Buy Me a Coffee page, but let me know if you want them. Anyway, let's move on to adding the road markings. For road markings, I wanted to keep it super simple and just add a white dashed center line. If you want to make highly accurate road markings, I highly recommend finding the documentation for road markings for the area you are recreating. For South Africa, the Department of Transport has this PDF with all of the examples and instructions. I found this only after doing the white dashed center line on the road, which I just guesstimated how long and how far to make them apart. For adding white road markings, I found that a white permanent marker works very well. The more traditional method of using masking tape and painting the lines has a few downsides. When removing the masking tape, it can damage the paint underneath and the tape doesn't always create a good seal. So paint can bleed underneath the edge and leave a messy edge. To avoid that, you'd have to spray a layer of matte varnish after applying the tape and then paint your lines. However, there's still the risk of damaging the paint when peeling off the tape. So I found that a white permanent marker works excellent. However, when using a ruler, the marker can still bleed underneath the edge, so do some testing before marking your roads, and if you notice it bleeding underneath the edge, you'll need to use a beveled ruler. My permanent marker actually stopped working properly after drawing a few lines, and I think that's because I didn't clean off the grey dust from the dried spray paint, which clogged up the tip of the marker. I cleaned it in some warm water since it's a water-based marker, and I got it somewhat working again. I then painted all of the curbstones a concrete grey color. In some areas they are painted black and white or white and yellow, but I'm not sure how that's gonna look, so grey they will be for now. Next, I wanted to add some pothole patches. The first two will be in the parking lot where I accidentally wrapped up some paint when removing masking tape. I don't think the plaster was fully dried, which can make the paint soft and easily damageable. I did the first pothole patch using the paper with a cutout as a stencil and using a sponge to apply the paint, and it worked great. But for the second one, I didn't want to also get paint on the curbstones, so I tried using a small paintbrush to apply the paint, which seemed to work alright until I removed the stencil. So I did what I could to rescue it. At this stage, I didn't feel ready to add more pothole patches, so I just used the rest of the paint as a base coat on the parking island, where I will add dirt later. After doing some research and looking at roads, I saw there are quite a lot of utility trench repairs. That's those patch lines on the road where the surface was cut open to lay cables or pipes and then resealed. Here you can see what I meant with the paint bleeding underneath the tape. I didn't expect it to be that bad. Maybe if I didn't use a paintbrush and used a sponge to apply the paint, it would turn out better. But anyway, I have a way to save this. But first, I cut some pothole patch shapes in a paper and again using it as a stencil and applying the paint with a sponge. With this, it's important to look at references and really think about why and where potholes would occur and what shape they would use to patch it. Don't use the same shape for more than one or two potholes, and also connect some of them together. After letting the paint dry, I use a black pen to draw the dark edge you often see around pothole repairs in real life. That black edge is a sealant which is used to keep water out, because if water were to get in and pools along the edge, a new pothole will form really fast. But they don't seem to use it in every scenario, so I only do it for some of the bigger ones. And that's also how I fixed the smudged edge on the utility trench repairs, where the paint was smudged under the masking tape. Next, I make a dark brown oil wash. This will darken the road surface a bit and add contrast, making all of the scratches and imperfections visible. I start by applying the wash on the parking lot, using a normal paintbrush. I apply it over the whole surface, but no old asphalt parking lot is perfectly clean and maintained, so I don't want to apply it perfectly even on the whole surface. I apply a bit stronger dark wash in the potholes, cracks and scratches that I want to make a bit more visible by giving them a bit more contrast. This is how it looks after the wash has dried, but we can make it look so much better with the next step. And that's using chalk pastels. Chalk pastels can achieve very similar effects compared to more expensive weathering powders, and it's much cheaper when you buy them in a set like these. To use them as weathering powders, I scrape off some pigment with my hobby knife like this. To apply it, I've seen some people use makeup sponges, however I don't have any makeup stuff and I wasn't interested in buying any, so I just used a normal paintbrush and my fingers. I started with the parking lot, applying a mix of black and grey pigments. I also apply some brown on the sides to simulate dirt buildup. I also used my fingers to rub it in a bit and blend the colors together. On real roads, the areas where the tires usually run are often a bit darker because of rubber buildup. This also has to be a quite subtle effect and it's easy to overdo. I tried to do this by first applying the darker pigment only where the tires would run, and then applying a bit less dark pigment on the whole road. By the way, if you are new to the channel, my name is Gerben. My videos are all about DIY solutions for expensive model railroading stuff, tutorials and how-to videos about scenery, and occasionally 3D printing. Make sure to subscribe if that sounds interesting, and if you are already subscribed, thank you so much, and click the like button instead, because likes are the YouTube currency. I really appreciate any support. Once done, I use some light grey pigment to create the dust on the road where the dirt driveways connect to the asphalt road. To be fair, those expensive weathering powders are better and it's not the same as these chalk pastels, but these chalk pastels work just fine. And this is how the road looks after applying the weathering powders. I then wanted to add a bit of texture in the potholes, so I used some light grey dirt with some larger crushed rock bits in it. I thought I could change the color and darken it after applying it using a dark wash. However, as you see, it didn't work that great and I should have used a darker grout to begin with. But I used some dark pigments to darken it a bit and added some brown to simulate dirt, and it turned out okay. At this stage, I was very happy with how it looked. But the weathering will be easily ruined by moisture and over time the weathering powders will disappear. So it's important to clean off any unwanted particles and seal it using matte varnish. I used Tamiya flat clear. I didn't know if I should mask the tracks or not, so I just masked them to be safe. Luckily it wasn't as windy that day, so I could do this outside. After letting the varnish dry, it looked very good. However, the light grey weathering kinda disappeared after varnishing. I'm not sure why. I then used 600 grit sandpaper to clean the tops of the rails. I know it's not a good idea to clean the rails with the sandpaper, I know it creates scratches and makes it less effective, but I have already used sandpaper on it and I don't really care. Before looking at the final result, let's quickly finish the parking island. And this is the final result. There are a few things I still want to improve and work on. I want to make the bus shelter for the bus stop. I want to add some more weathering and add a bit of dirt on the sides of the road and those kind of things. But I will do that in another video. Let me know if I should make a dedicated video about making the trees. Overall, I think repainting this road made it look so much better. Let me know if you liked the video and if I should make more longer format videos like this one. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.